Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Israel at War, an update from TV7 News Israel. I am Amir Oren, sitting in for the traveling Jonathan Hessen, and this is day 460 since the horrific onslaught and massacre that Hamas perpetrated on October the 7th, 2023. Israel is still involved on several fronts, even though there is a fragile ceasefire on the Lebanese border between Israel and Hezbollah. Nevertheless, there is still action. And we are very glad and honored to have with us two distinguished panelists from Central Israel, Colonel in the reserves, Miri, formerly a senior military intelligence official, as well as an advisor in the Prime Minister's office, and a distinguished scholar on counterterrorism and other topics. Colonel Eisen, welcome.
Shalom, shalom to everybody. Great to be here.
Thank you. And Brigadier General in the Reserve, Israeli Air Force officer Doron Gavish, formerly the commanding general of Israel's air and missile defense, and now on a similar mission, the commanding officer of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense Task Force. General Gavish, welcome too.
Shalom, Amir, and shalom, Miri, and shalom to our audience. Just to make sure that there are no mistakes, there is only one commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense, and this is General Biran, who is serving in the Israeli Air Force. As a reservist, my job is commander of the Israeli Task Force, which is the force that is integrating the CENTCOM ballistic missile defense into the defense of Israel. So now we are on the same sheet of music.
It sounds at least as impressive as your old job, but nevertheless, we will obviously note the difference between being the commanding general of the entire force and the task force. But it's an important task, nevertheless. Let me pose the same question to both of you. The main topic of discussion in the Israeli public, as well as between the Israeli government and the Israeli military and other parties, is what will happen with the hostage deal negotiated through mediators with Hamas. There are basically three options. One is to have an all-for-all deal. All of the Israeli hostages, alive and dead, are being released, are back in Israel, in exchange for an Israeli declaration that the war in Gaza is over. The IDF is withdrawing from Gaza, and Palestinian prisoners are being released from Israeli prisons. Many more Palestinians in exchange for a few dozen Israelis. The other option is the so-called partial deal. Only several, maybe 2 dozen, 3 dozen Israelis being released from Hamas captivity, but Israel does not declare that the war is over. There is some respite, a ceasefire, a truce, but there must be a second phase in order for the bigger deal to be completed. And the third option is the status quo. Nothing is happening. All of the hostages are still there, probably in the tunnels. The war drags on. There are still more Israeli casualties in Gaza. Only earlier this week, 3 Israeli officers and men were killed. And this can go on until something breaks. So what, in your view, is the realistic option, and what would you have recommended had you been close to those in the corridors of power? Miri Eisen, please go first.
You're asking the most difficult question there is, because what you didn't say in the underlying aspect of the question, Amir, is that none of them are Disney happily ever after. And I want that to be clear to everybody. Even if all 100 would come back and the war would end, those 100, of which many are killed and that we know they're dead, the ones that are alive and come back, this is not a happy situation to let out tens of thousands. Okay, we're talking about thousands of Hamas and Palestinian Jihad and Palestinian prisoners that are in Israeli jails being let out. This is not views that we want to see. So it isn't that the first one is a good ending, the second one is an okay ending, and the third one is a bad. All three are horrific compromises or different approaches to what could be done. That's not the question you asked me. You asked me which would I go on. And my answer is that I look at Hamas. And Hamas is a terror army. They did the attack on October 7th to take these hostages. They did the attack on October 7th to kill, terrorize, and part of the terrorizing is in both taking the hostages, in releasing the psychological warfare films, clips that they put out of Israeli individuals, and especially to try to use this to legitimize themselves, to make as if equal the hostages that they took so brutally and hold so brutally and don't tell us about, to be the same as Palestinian prisoners that were arrested, put on trial, put on jail, and are sitting in Israeli jails. They cannot be on the same level. And so for me, what I would do if it was up to me is I would say, if there is any possibility for the 104 to get them all out, I would say do so. But I don't think Hamas will ever agree to all of the 100. And because I don't think that Hamas will, what I would say is to do the partial, not to stay in the situation where none come back, to do the partial, because I just don't think that Hamas will deliver the 100. And in that case, it's already my looking into it and saying, why would Hamas not deliver the 100? Because Hamas at the end views these as only bargaining chips, not as human beings. They view the hostages as being worthwhile, both dead, not just alive. And as such, I really do fear that they would prefer to give back 100 dead hostages. And I can't imagine that situation. So I would say get back the ones that we know are alive. And the worst part at the end of everything that I just said, Emil, is that it is already January 2025, and neither you nor me nor Doron, and I don't think nor the state of Israel really know who's alive and who's dead. And Hamas have never told us. Can you imagine taking hostages and not saying anything for such a long time, 460 days?
Yes, not for such a long time, only a few months, but Hafez Assad, after the Yom Kippur War, when he negotiated with Henry Kissinger territorial compromises on Israel's behalf, he held the list of prisoners of war very close to his chest for every list, not to mention then for returning the wounded and then returning the others. He managed to squeeze concession after concession, and this is the playbook that obviously Hamas has been following too. General Gavish, leadership demands difficult decisions. You're a military leader. You have a view towards the thinking of the Israeli political leadership. What's your response to the question I posed earlier?
First of all, I agree with Miri. She said rightly that this is probably the most challenging question to ask those days. And I also agree with the way that she analyzed it. So I won't say I won't go it over again. I would add to it a few points from my point of view. First of all is the time limit. We have to remember that it is not that we are in a position that we have a long time to see, to discuss, and to get to this exact point when all the stars are aligned. The main challenge is that those people who live there, they are under danger. Some of them already died during the time in the tunnels with those Hamas terrorists. We know that the conditions are very hard. We know that they are suffering from hunger. We know that some of them are even being abused. We know that their mentality situation is very hard. So you combine all of those, and we understand that time is a factor. And this is the first thing. The second thing, and this is something that was said by the IDF all along the way, is that the IDF would adapt itself to any decision that would be made by the Israeli cabinet. Any decision we would know how to deal with. If we would have to go out, to go in, to stay in one area and to stay in the other area. Of course, there are all kinds of preferences. We won't discuss it here. But we basically understand what are the main security challenges, and in general, we could say, and this is blocking the Hamas to rearm himself, exactly as we saw in the northern part of Israel with the Hezbollah. So this is, of course, the one thing, and not allowing them to rebuild themselves within the Gaza Strip and to become the ruler once again of the Gaza Strip. So those are the main challenges, of course, that we would have to deal with. So once again, you combine everything together, whatever decision that our leaders would come to, would have to take in consideration from one hand the strategic situation, the goals of the war, and of course the condition of our hostages. And for this, we don't really have time, and we all want to see them back home as far as we can.
Is the military presence, General Gavish, military presence of the IDF in Gaza an asset or a burden? Of course, once they are there, they can try to find and kill Hamas operatives, but there are also Israeli casualties, more than 40 over the last several weeks. Only in northern Gaza, the reserve soldiers, some of whom have been on active duty for more than 200 days, cannot be released. The army cannot train properly for its next missions. And we see that the projectile launches, be they drones or rockets, which have apparently ceased for several months, have resumed. Over the last 2 weeks, there were some half a dozen such launches, and those residents of the south in Israel who wanted to be assured that they can come home now find themselves going to their shelters again because of the air raids.
So the answer is within your question, Amir. Of course, it is an asset. It's a burden to whom? Unfortunately, when you are in a military environment and when you are in a war environment, some of the soldiers are being injured, and unfortunately, some of them are being killed. But we are there for a purpose. We have to remember, if we would go with this burden way of thinking, it means that let's go out of the Gaza Strip, let's leave them over there, and they will do whatever they want, and we know exactly what they want to do. So there is no question. This is an asset. We have to be there in one form or in another form. We cannot allow the history to come back. We have to make sure that the Gaza Strip and the strategic situation in the south part of Israel would be changed. Of course, if there would be all kind of agreements that would allow the IDF to withdraw from those areas, not to be active on those areas, that would be nice. But I don't see it something realistic, unfortunately, in the next few years, probably. Maybe some of the Arab countries would decide that they want to step in, to pour money, to bring some soldiers, to keep the peace. Maybe some of our friends from Europe would like to do it, to come, to deploy their forces to the Gaza Strip and, to be part of rebuilding this area, but unfortunately, we don't see that anyone is willing to do it. And there are all kinds of good ideas coming from all over, but at the end of the day, this is our task, Israel. We have to look on our own interest, and so there's no question that being over there, this is an asset, this is a strategic asset, and how exactly to do it, this would be decided according to the way that the political and military situation will evolve.
Miri Eisen, what are the right priorities for Israel as it considers the fact that its troops are now deployed across from the line of separation on the Golan Heights, a forward defense, because the situation in Syria is so uncertain. No one knows whether hostile forces to Israel could get hold of the territory there, of the high ground. Also, there are, of course, Israeli troops in South Lebanon, as long as the ceasefire is still evolving. We are about 3 weeks before it is supposed to end, 2 to 3 weeks. And in Judea and Samaria, earlier this week, 3 Israelis were killed, 2 elderly women, and a police officer in a daytime terror act. So we hear some calls, not only by the residents of these areas, the Jewish residents, but also by the Minister of Defense and others, that Israel should deploy more forces to its eastern front there, West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And some people have gone so far as to demand that Israel view the West Bank exactly as it does Gaza. And that is, if there is a town, a village, a city where terror emanates from, Israel should attack it the same way it did in Jabalia, Rafah, Khan Yunis. What's your view?
Israel is the legal occupier of the West Bank in accordance to Israeli law. It's vastly different from the Gaza Strip. Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005. For our viewers, I don't think that we need to remind them of that. But I say that because our military status, our legal status in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria is very different. But think of how you approach this question. You started to talk about Syria. You moved on to Lebanon. You reminded us, of the Gaza Strip, and then you went on into Judea and Samaria. And I'll remind us, the one is still here, that the ones that have been fighting at us again from afar have been from Yemen, which is whatever it is, 2,000 kilometers away, 1,300 miles. I'm never sure of the distance. And I say that because we're still in that war. When you talk about Israel's capabilities, we have been fighting on so many different fronts with different types of forces for over 450 days. Because we've been fighting against Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip for the last 460 days. Hezbollah in Lebanon joined in 459 days ago. The Houthis in Yemen already joined in October of 2023. So how should we be deploying the Israeli capabilities now? We have to look at it in that broad sense. You can't say, now I'm going to go do Judea and Samaria. We aren't yet done with, there's 100 hostages in the Gaza Strip. What's happening in the Gaza Strip impacts the area also south of Israel. You mentioned the projectiles, UAVs. If we're not there, then chaos allows Hamas. So if we take out forces now to be in the Judea and Samaria, that's going to have an implication. When you talk about Hezbollah in Lebanon, there's supposed to be elections for a president in Lebanon. Hezbollah is not the same as it was before everything that we did to it in 2024. And yet, I don't think that the Lebanese are still going to be able to elect a president. They haven't had a president for 2 years, and theirs is a functional president. It's not an ornamental president. And I give that in the background because we need to reassess how we look overall. And the deployment of Israeli forces inside Judea and Samaria, where you have around 500,000 Israelis and probably around 2.5 million Palestinians is not the same as what was in the Gaza Strip before October 7th, when there were 0 Israelis and 2.2 million Palestinians who attacked us. And so I don't think that we need to use the same type of forces, the same type of deployment, and look at the threats in the same way. We absolutely need to look at all of them and assess which ones are more challenging and which less. And I'm just going to end by saying that afterwards, every time when we're on this channel, I don't feel the need to say, go look at a map. But every single time we start this daily update, we show a map. Distances here are very small. The distance from the town of Tulkarem, where Israeli forces have been fighting day after day against terror elements that are horrific, the distance from there to the Mediterranean Sea is 10 kilometers. That's only 6 miles. It's ridiculous how close it is. So that when we're talking about these challenges, I said we need to assess them, but this isn't about taking what we did against Hamas on the Gaza Strip and using that in the same way in Judea and Samaria.
You know, it's very interesting when you mention this so-called tyranny of distance or tyranny of geography. Americans usually talk about it in a different way when they speak about the Pacific theater and how long it takes for a transport plane or an aircraft carrier to cross long distances. They always say this is why they need bases. This is why in planning they must factor in the amount of time needed to reach from one theater to another. And here, what you are saying is in miniature the tyranny of distance, how close it is, not how far it is. General Gavish, the IDF has announced that the vice commander of CENTCOM, Admiral Brad Cooper, has visited Israel, and along with his counterpart, the vice chief of staff of the IDF, Major General Amir Baram, visited several locations and held discussions, looked at presentations, and agreed on the common picture. Now, mind you, this Admiral Brad Cooper is not Bradley Cooper of Hollywood fame. This is Bradford Cooper. So we are talking about a real admiral, not someone playing an admiral. Your own job brings you into frequent contact with your American counterparts. Now, obviously, you cannot speak for them, but what is your impression regarding the alliance, the cooperation and collaboration between the IDF and CENTCOM?
Well, Amir, we've talked about it more than once, and I always start reminding everyone that we have a statement that we use when we talk to each other, which is partners in peace, brothers in war. And we literally call each other, hey, brother, how are you? And this is how close we are. Personally, we are close. From a military point of view, we are close. And also we see eye to eye. The challenges in the Mediterranean. Of course, we fight shoulder to shoulder. We have to remember it. It happened in April. It happened in October during the raids coming from Iran. It happens all the last few months with the UAVs and ballistic missiles coming from the Houthis. Tonight, few hours ago, there was a strike by CENTCOM in Yemen against the Houthis, and we see those strikes in the last few weeks, even much more of them. We know what they think about our enemies. Of course, it is not only about us military people making the decisions. Decisions are making by our politicians, by our leaders, both sides. In general, we could say, of course, that we do see most of the things eye to eye, but there are also some of those things that there are some differences in the way that we are looking into the region. But when we come back, and of course, there is a government change in the US, so we would see if this would bring some changes also to our area. Probably yes. But when it comes back to military, so this visit is one of tens and even more hundreds, maybe visits of U.S. Officials, U.S. Generals, U.S. military personnel, and we have to remember that there are U.S. forces deployed, boots on the ground here in Israel. The Third Battery that was deployed to Israel took part also in the last interceptions from Yemen. We have to remember that kind of boots on the ground we have with the U.S. ships which are deployed in the Mediterranean and in the Red Sea. So it is not only talking about if we see things eye to eye. This is really literally fighting shoulder to shoulder against the bad guys, and there is no question among us who are the good guys and who are the bad guys.
The good guys and the good girls. Thank you, both of you, Colonel in the reserves, Miri Eisen, Brigadier General in the reserves, Doron Gavish. We will obviously meet again very soon. This has been Israel at War, an update, and we will be back tomorrow with another edition. For the time being, Shalom from Jerusalem.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.